Somewhere along the way, you learned that strength meant not breaking, that the right response to pain was to absorb it quietly, to keep moving, to present a composed face to the world while managing whatever was happening inside with the private efficiency of someone who had decided, at some point they can no longer precisely locate, that needing help was not something they were allowed to do. You became good at it, so good that the people around you stopped checking on you, so good that you stopped checking on yourself, so good that the performance of strength and the experience of it became genuinely difficult to distinguish until something happened that made the distinction impossible to ignore any longer. This audiobook is for the person who is tired of carrying everything alone, who has confused endurance with health, as silence with dignity, and the absence of breakdown with the presence of genuine well-being. Who is ready, perhaps for the first time, to consider the possibility that the strongest thing they could do is stop pretending? If this is already reaching something in you, subscribe before we begin. Now let us go deeper. Chapter 1. The lie that strength requires silence. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that does not show on the face. It does not produce the visible fatigue of a person who has not slept or the obvious distress of someone in acute crisis. It is the exhaustion of a person who has been strong for so long in the particular way that the world rewards and applauds and depends upon, that they have lost genuine contact with what they are actually feeling beneath the performance of being fine. They function, they deliver, they show up consistently and competently and with enough apparent composure that the people around them have long since stopped wondering whether they might need something. And in the private interior of that functioning, composure performing, consistently delivering person, something is quietly, persistently, exhaustingly wrong. You may know this exhaustion. You may be living inside it right now. The lie at the center of this exhaustion is one that most people absorb so early and so completely that they have never examined it as a lie. They experience it simply as the truth of how things are, as the obvious, self-evident reality that strong people handle their difficulties privately, that asking for help is a form of weakness, and that the appropriate response to pain or fear or genuine need is to manage it internally until it is no longer a problem, rather than to bring it honestly to the people and the relationships that exist, at least in part, for exactly that purpose. This lie did not arrive from nowhere. It was taught through the environments that shaped you, the models of strength you were given, the explicit and implicit messages about what it meant to be capable, to be admirable, to be the kind of person worth depending on. For many people, it was taught in childhood, in homes where the adults who modeled life for them demonstrated through their own behavior that difficulty was a private matter, that vulnerability was not safe, that the right response to being in pain was to continue functioning and to do so without burdening anyone else with the reality of what the functioning was costing. For others, it was taught through the specific experiences of trying to be honest about difficulty and finding that the response was inadequate, that the vulnerability offered was met with discomfort or dismissal or advice that missed the point, that the honest expression of need produced not the genuine reception it required, but something that reinforced the original belief that keeping it private was safer and more effective than bringing it out. And so the pattern deepened. The walls went up. The performance of strength became more practiced and more complete, and the person inside it became gradually more isolated from the genuine human connection that authentic vulnerability makes possible. The cost of this lie is paid in ways that accumulate slowly and then become impossible to ignore. It is paid in the quality of your relationships, which remain, however warm and however real in other dimensions, at the specific distance that the performance of strength creates. The people who love you cannot fully reach you because you will not let them into the places where you most need to be reached. They sense the distance without always understanding its source, and the relationship carries, as a permanent low-grade feature, the particular sadness of two people who are genuinely close and genuinely separate in the same breath. It is paid in your physical health, which the research on emotional suppression consistently and unambiguously connects to the chronic stress of maintaining a performance that the body experiences as an ongoing threat response. The sustained effort of holding yourself together against the genuine weight of unprocessed difficulty is not free. It costs the body something real, in the form of elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep, the particular physical heaviness of a nervous system that has been operating in a mode of managed tension for years without adequate release. And it is paid in your relationship with yourself, in the growing distance from your own interior that results from years of treating your genuine emotional experience as something to be managed rather than felt, to be suppressed rather than processed, to be hidden from others and from yourself rather than honestly acknowledged as the real and legitimate and entirely human experience that it is. The person who has been performing strength for long enough eventually loses genuine contact with what they are actually experiencing. They know what they are supposed to feel: composed, capable, fine, and they know distantly that there is something else beneath that. But the something else has been suppressed so consistently and so thoroughly that accessing it requires an effort that the performance of strength was specifically designed to avoid. Consider a man named Jonathan. By every external measure, he was the person in his social world that other people leaned on, the one called in a crisis, the one whose advice was sought and whose steadiness was depended upon. He had built this identity over decades, beginning in a childhood where the circumstances of his family required him, at an age where it was not appropriate to be required of him, to be the stable one, the one who did not add to the difficulty by having difficulty of his own, the one who managed his own distress privately so that the limited emotional resources of the household could go where they were most visibly needed. He had been good at it then, and he had continued being good at it into adulthood, where the skill had translated into a reputation for reliability and strength that he was genuinely proud of and genuinely trapped by. Proud because it was real. The capability was genuine. The care for the people he supported was authentic. The steadiness he provided in other people's crises was not performed, but earned through decades of genuine self-discipline. Trapped because the identity that had been built around the capability had left no room for the acknowledgement that he too had crises, that he too needed steadiness from someone else occasionally, that the person who was always the rock for everyone around him was also a person with a genuine interior life that had been largely unattended for as long as he could remember. The moment Jonathan's performance of strength finally became unsustainable arrived not dramatically but in the form of a persistent inability to feel much of anything. Not depression in the clinical sense, though it shared some of its features. It's more accurately described as a flatness, a reduction in the range and intensity of his emotional experience that had happened so gradually he had not noticed the change until the distance between himself and genuine feeling had become wide enough to be unmistakable. He had suppressed for so long that the suppression had become structural. The walls built to manage the performance of strength had not only kept difficulty out, they had kept everything out. The joy as well as the pain, the genuine warmth as well as the vulnerability, the full range of human emotional experience, as well as the specific parts of it that the performance of strength had required him to hide. This is one of the least discussed and most significant costs of prolonged emotional suppression. It is not selective. While you cannot build walls that keep only the difficult feelings out while leaving the good ones freely accessible, the same suppression that prevents the pain from surfacing prevents the genuine aliveness of full emotional experience from being available. The person who has been strong in the particular way this chapter is describing, who has managed their interior for years with the efficiency of someone whose emotional life is primarily a performance management challenge and eventually finds that the management has been too complete, that in securing the performance of fine, they have forfeited access to the genuine experience of being fully alive. Jonathan did not fix this quickly. The patterns of a lifetime do not yield to a single honest conversation or a weekend of reflection, however genuine. But he began. And the beginning looked like the simplest and most difficult thing available to a person who has been performing strength for as long as he had. It looked like telling one person the truth, not the full truth of everything accumulated over decades. That would have been overwhelming and would not have been fair to the person receiving it. One truth, one honest acknowledgement of genuine difficulty to one person who was capable of receiving it with the quality of genuine attention it required. He chose his closest friend. He said in words that he described afterward as the most frightening he had spoken in years, that he was not doing as well as he appeared to be doing, that he was tired in a way that sleep was not addressing, that he had been carrying something for a long time and did not know how to put it down and was not even sure anymore what it was, only that the carrying was no longer sustainable in the way it had been. His friend did not offer solutions, did not attempt to fix the situation or redirect Jonathan toward the positive, or move quickly past the discomfort of the disclosure to the more comfortable territory of problem solving. He simply said that he was glad Jonathan had told him, that he had suspected for a long time that the person everyone leaned on might be someone who needed leaning on himself occasionally, and that this conversation could be the beginning of a different kind of friendship than the one they had been having, one in which the exchange of genuine support moved in both directions rather than only one. Jonathan described what he felt in the minutes after that exchange as something he found genuinely difficult to name. Not relief exactly, though relief was part of it. Something more like the particular physical sensation of setting down something heavy that you have been carrying for so long that you had stopped noticing its weight. And then, in the sudden absence of the weight, becoming aware for the first time of how much it had been costing you to carry it. This is what becomes available when the performance of strength is set down. Not weakness, not the collapse that the fear of vulnerability has always predicted, but something more honest and more human and more genuinely sustainable than the performance that preceded it. The beginning of a different relationship with yourself and with the people around you. One in which genuine strength, as opposed to the perform version, becomes possible for perhaps the first time. Because genuine strength is not the absence of need or the suppression of difficulty or the sustained performance of composure in the face of everything that would, if honestly acknowledged, require something different. Genuine strength is the capacity to be honest about your actual condition and to engage with it directly rather than managing it from a safe distance. It is the courage to say, I am not fine when you are not fine, to ask for what you need when you need it, to bring your genuine self, the unmanaged, unperformed, honestly struggling version, to the relationships that exist, in part to receive exactly that. And the lie is that strength requires silence. The truth is that silence, sustained long enough, is one of the most effective ways to ensure that strength never genuinely develops. Because genuine strength is built not through the avoidance of difficulty, but through the honest engagement with it. And honest engagement requires the acknowledgement that the difficulty is real. Stop pretending it is not. That is where everything else begins. Chapter 2, The Weight You Were Never Meant to Carry Alone. There is a particular moment that many people can identify if they are willing to look back honestly at their own history as the moment they decided, or more accurately, the moment it was decided for them, by circumstances they were too young or too overwhelmed to consciously evaluate, that they were on their own with the difficult things, that the support they needed was not available in the form they needed it, that the people who should have been the safe landing place for their genuine experience were not able to be that for whatever reason in that specific season, and that the appropriate response to this reality was to develop the internal capacity to handle everything without external support, to become as early and as completely as possible someone who did not require the kind of help that had proven unreliable or unavailable or unsafe to ask for. This decision, made in the specific conditions of a specific time in a specific life, was not wrong. It was adaptive. Oh, it was the entirely intelligent and entirely reasonable response of a person who assessed their environment accurately and developed the coping strategy most suited to surviving it. The problem is not that the decision was made. The problem is what happens when a decision made for the conditions of one season of life is carried, unexamined, and unchanged into every subsequent season. When the adaptive strategy of a child in a difficult environment becomes the default operating mode of an adult in an entirely different environment that would, if the strategy were updated, be capable of offering what the original environment could not. Most people who carry significant weight alone do not do so because the people around them are genuinely incapable of receiving it. And they do so because the early learning about what happens when you bring your weight to other people has never been revised in light of the adult relationships that are actually available to them. The expectation of inadequate response, formed in conditions where inadequate response was the reality, functions as a self-fulfilling filter. It prevents the genuine reaching out that would provide the evidence needed to update the expectation, and the expectation therefore remains intact, silently directing the person away from the support that their current life, if genuinely tested, might actually be capable of providing. This is one of the most common and most costly patterns in human psychology, the persistence of adaptive strategies beyond the conditions that made them adaptive. The child who learned that vulnerability was unsafe in their original environment carries that learning into adulthood as if it were a permanent truth about the world, rather than an accurate observation about a specific and time-limited context. And the cost of carrying it is the cost of the chapter heading, the weight that was never meant to be carried alone indefinitely, because the possibility that it could be shared has never genuinely been tested. A woman named Sophia grew up in a household organized around her mother's chronic illness. She was the eldest of three children, and the practical and emotional demands of the family fell on her with a weight and a consistency that produced, by the time she was an adult, a level of competence and self-sufficiency that everyone around her admired and that she experienced privately as a prison. She had never learned to receive care because the environment of her childhood had not contained a reliable source of it. She had learned to give it, to manage it, to coordinate it, to ensure that the people around her had what they needed. But the direction of care in her life had been so consistently outward for so long that the experience of receiving it had become genuinely foreign, uncomfortable, something she deflected with the practiced ease of someone who had been deflecting it for decades. In her adult relationships, she was warm and generous and genuinely caring. She was also, as the people who were closest to her eventually recognized, almost impossible to actually help. Not because she was cold or resistant or ungrateful. She was none of those things. But because every genuine offer of support was met with a graceful, competent, warmly delivered redirection. She was fine. She had it handled. She appreciated the offer and did not need it, but thank you truly. The deflection was so smooth and so habitual that most people eventually stopped offering, which confirmed, in the self-fulfilling way of deeply held unconscious beliefs, that support was not genuinely available, without recognizing that the unavailability was being actively, if unconsciously, engineered by the person who needed it most. What Sophia was carrying alone was not only the practical weight of a busy and demanding life, though that was real. She was carrying the emotional weight of a childhood that had asked too much of her before she had the resources to give it. And that had never been honestly processed because processing it would have required a quality of supported vulnerability that her environment had never provided and that her adult patterns of self-sufficiency had never permitted. She was carrying grief for the childhood she had not had, for the weight that had been placed on her before she could choose it, for the version of herself that had been required to grow up faster than growing up should require. And she was carrying it with the particular loneliness of someone who had become so expert at appearing not to need that the genuine need had become invisible to everyone around her, including herself. The turning point for Sophia was not a crisis, though crises have their own way of forcing the confrontation with what has been avoided. It was a conversation, a long, quiet, entirely unplanned conversation with a friend who had known her for 12 years and who said with the gentle directness of genuine care that she had never once in 12 years seen Sophia actually lean on anyone, that she had watched her carry everything with a competence that was genuinely impressive, and that had always made her sad in a way she had never been able to explain until now. That the competence was real, but it was also, she suspected, a wall, and that she had been waiting for 12 years for an invitation past it. Sophia was quiet for a long time after that, not because she was composing a deflection. For once, the deflection did not come, because something in what her friend said had landed in a place below the level at which the deflection normally operated. She said, finally, that she did not know how to let people in, that she had been so long without the practice of it that the mechanism felt genuinely unfamiliar, like a language she had heard spoken but never learned, that she wanted to let people in but did not know where to begin with the wanting. Her friend said something simple and precise. She said that beginning was enough, that the wanting to let people in, honestly acknowledged, was already different from the years of managed self-sufficiency that had preceded it, that the rest was practice, and that practice began with exactly what was happening between them in that moment. The honest acknowledgement of what was true, without the deflection, without the graceful redirection, without the competent management of the conversation back to safer territory. This is the beginning of putting down weight that was never meant to be carried alone. Not the dramatic dismantling of every wall simultaneously, not the sudden, wholesale surrender of the self-sufficiency that has been the organizing strategy of your adult life, but the single, honest, vulnerable moment of acknowledging to one person in one conversation without the deflection that you are carrying something, that it is heavy, and that you are, for the first time, willing to consider the possibility that you do not have to carry it by yourself. The weight that most people carry alone falls into several categories, and understanding which category your weight belongs to matters for how the carrying of it can be addressed. There is the practical weight, the logistical, financial, and organizational demands of a life that has been structured around one person, managing everything because asking for help with the practical dimensions of life feels like an imposition that the performance of strength cannot accommodate. There is the emotional weight, the unprocessed grief, the accumulated disappointments, the fears and the loneliness, and the genuine needs that have been managed rather than felt for years. And there is the relational weight, the specific burden of being the person that everyone else brings their weight to, without the reciprocal experience of being able to bring your weight to anyone in return. All three of these categories of weight share a common feature. They become heavier when carried alone than they would be if shared, and lighter when shared than the fear of sharing them predicts. And this is one of the most consistent findings in the psychology of social support. And it is one that runs directly counter to the intuition of the person who has been performing strength for years. That intuition says that bringing your weight to other people adds to the total weight in the system, that your difficulty, shared, becomes a burden that now exists in two places instead of one. The reality, consistently and reliably, is the opposite. Weight shared is weight reduced, not because the practical facts of the situation change, but because the experience of carrying it changes when the carrying is not solitary. When the person beside you knows what you are carrying and is choosing to walk alongside you with that knowledge. When the loneliness of the solo carry is replaced by the particular, irreplaceable quality of being genuinely accompanied. You were not designed to carry everything alone. Not psychologically, not neurologically, not in the basic architecture of what a human being is and what a human being requires. The research on this is unambiguous. Humans are social creatures whose nervous systems are literally regulated in part by the presence and the quality of other people. The experience of genuine social support, of being honestly known and consistently accompanied by people who are invested in your well-being, is not a luxury for the emotionally indulgent. It is a biological necessity for the sustainably functioning human. In the absence of it, the chronic structural aloneness of someone who has decided, for reasons that made sense when the decision was made, that the weight is theirs to carry solo, produces costs that accumulate in the body and the mind and the quality of daily life in ways that no amount of individual strength and self-discipline can fully compensate for. The weight you are carrying right now, whatever specific form it takes in your specific life, is not evidence of your strength. It is evidence of the limit of what individual strength was designed to sustain. Every structure has a load-bearing capacity. Every human being has a weight-bearing limit that is genuinely exceeded when the carrying is genuinely solitary and the weight is genuinely real. And the person who has reached that limit and continues to perform as if the limit does not exist is not demonstrating strength. They are demonstrating the particular, costly, ultimately unsustainable determination of someone who has confused the endurance of excessive weight with the possession of adequate strength. Put some of it down, not all of it, not immediately, not without the discernment of understanding which pieces can be safely shared and with whom, but some of it. Begin with the honest acknowledgement to yourself before anyone else that what you are carrying is heavy. That heavy is how it actually feels, regardless of how it appears. That the appearance and the experience have been sufficiently separate for sufficiently long that the performance itself has become a weight added to all the others. And then find the person, one person, with the patience and the genuine care and the capacity for honest reception that this kind of sharing requires. And tell them something true, not everything. Not the full accumulated weight of everything that has been carried alone. One true thing, honestly delivered, without the deflection that has been automatic for so long. That one true thing, received by one person who is capable of genuinely receiving it, will change something. Not everything, not immediately, but something real. The first loosening of a weight that has been carried alone for too long and that has been waiting with the patient inevitability of something that was never meant to be permanent, to be set down. You were never meant to carry it alone. That was never the requirement, however convincingly it presented itself as one. The requirement was always shared carrying, honest accompaniment, was the genuinely human experience of difficulty met by genuine support rather than managed in the solitary performance of a strength that cost more than it was ever designed to cost. Let someone in. The weight will change when you do. Chapter 3. What you're actually protecting. By staying strong, when a person has been performing strength for long enough, the performance stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a necessity. The walls that were originally constructed to manage a specific situation, to get through a particular difficulty, to survive a specific season, to function in an environment that did not have adequate space for genuine vulnerability, become over time the architecture of the self. They stop being something you built and become something you are. And the prospect of dismantling them, or even of examining them honestly, produces a fear that is entirely disproportionate to the actual risk of what honest vulnerability would cost. Because the fear is not really about what might happen if you let the walls down. It is about what you believe the walls are protecting. Understanding what you are actually protecting by staying strong is one of the most important and most under-examined questions available to a person who has lived inside the performance of strength long enough that it has become identity. Because the answer to that question is almost never what it appears to be on the surface. On the surface, most people who perform strength believe they are protecting others, protecting the people around them from the burden of their difficulty, protecting their relationships from the discomfort of genuine vulnerability, and protecting their professional and social standing from the judgment that they fear honest need would produce. This is the story most people tell themselves about why they stay strong, and it is not entirely false. The concern for others is often genuine. The awareness of relational and social risk is not imagined. But underneath the surface story, in the layer that honest examination reveals, the protection being maintained is almost always primarily self-directed. What you are most fundamentally protecting by staying strong is a specific image of yourself that you have come to depend on, consciously or not, as the primary source of your sense of worth, your sense of safety, and your sense of belonging in the relational world you inhabit. The image varies in its specifics from person to person. For some, it is the image of the capable one, the person who handles things, who does not need handling, whose competence is the quality that earns them their place in the relationships and the communities that matter to them. For others, it is the image of the selfless one, the person whose needs are always secondary, who is defined by their availability and their generosity, who has built their identity around being the person that others lean on, rather than the person who leans. For others still, it is the image of the one who has it together, the person whose life from the outside looks like evidence of successful navigation, of having figured something out that other people are still working on. These images are not trivial. They are not vanity projects. They developed for real reasons in real circumstances, and they have served real functions in the life of the person maintaining them. The capable image earned genuine admiration and genuine belonging in environments where capability was the primary currency of worth. The selfless image produced genuine warmth and genuine connection in relationships where being needed felt like being loved. The has it together image generated genuine safety in contexts where vulnerability had previously been met with judgment or exploitation, or the withdrawal of the regard that felt necessary for survival. The problem is not that these images developed. The problem is that they were never meant to be permanent. They were adaptive responses to specific conditions, and they became, through the gradual and unreflective accumulation of years, the fixed architecture of an identity that no longer has the flexibility to accommodate the honest truth of a person's actual experience. The image that was supposed to be a tool for navigating difficult circumstances became a cage. The performance that was supposed to be temporary became the whole show. And the person inside it, the actual, genuine, needing and struggling, and sometimes not fine person, became progressively invisible, even to themselves. A woman named Claire had built her identity around being the strong one so thoroughly and so early that she could not remember a version of herself that had not been defined by it. The eldest of four children in a home that had required more of her than it should have, she had learned before adolescence that her role was to be the stable one, the one who did not add to the difficulty, who absorbed what could not be absorbed by anyone else, who kept functioning when functioning was the thing most needed. She had carried this role into adulthood with the unconscious completeness of someone who has never been offered an alternative, and it had shaped every significant relationship she had, the friendships in which she was always the advisor, never the advisee, The romantic relationships in which she was always the steady one, the one who managed the emotional complexity, the one who could be depended upon but who rarely, if ever, expressed genuine dependence herself. When Claire was asked in a therapy session, she had entered not because she felt she needed it, but because a friend had suggested it and she had found herself unable to articulate a reason not to go. When what she was afraid would happen if people saw that she was struggling, she was quiet for a long time. The question had reached something she had not expected to be reachable. She said finally, with the careful slowness of someone speaking a thought they are forming as they speak it, that she was afraid they would leave, that the people in her life were there because of what she provided, the stability, the capability, the reliable availability, and that if she revealed the person underneath the provision, the person who was not always stable and not always capable and not always fine, there would be nothing left that merited their presence. This is the fear at the center of most performed strength, stated with unusual clarity. The belief that the image is not something you have, but something you are, that the capability or the selflessness or the composure is not a quality among many, but the quality, the one thing that makes you worth keeping, worth loving, worth the continued investment of the people whose regard you most depend on. And that to reveal the person beneath the image is to reveal that the image was all there was, that underneath the performance, there is nothing that merits the connection you have been afraid to risk losing. This belief is, in almost every case, both understandable and inaccurate. Understandable because it developed from real experiences in which conditional regard was the available model, in which love and belonging were experienced as contingent on performance rather than as unconditional features of genuine relationship. On inaccurate because the relationships built on genuine connection, on the honest, mutual, fully human exchange between people who see each other clearly, are not dependent on the maintenance of a performance. They are, in fact, made possible by its absence. The people who genuinely love you do not love the performance. They love to the extent that love is even possible through a performance, the person they sense beneath it, the person who is occasionally glimpsed in the unguarded moments, the tired evenings, the times when the performance slips just enough to let something real show through. And most of them have been waiting with varying degrees of patience and sometimes with a sadness they have not known how to name for the full version of the person they sense is there to become genuinely available to them. There is also something important to understand about the specific protection that strength provides in relation to the fear of being a burden. Many people who perform strength do so primarily because they are deeply, genuinely reluctant to impose their difficulty on the people they care about. They have watched people they love struggle with their own challenges, and they do not want to add to that weight. They have experienced the guilt of being cared for and found it more uncomfortable than the difficulty they were being cared through. They have internalized, often from very early in their lives, a hierarchy of need in which their own consistently ranks below everyone else's, not as a conscious philosophy, but as an operational assumption that shapes every decision about what to share and what to keep private. The protection being maintained here is real, and the care motivating it is genuine, but it rests on a misunderstanding of what burden actually means in the context of genuine relationship. Genuine relationship is not a transaction in which each person is responsible for minimizing their demands on the other in order to preserve the other's resources. It is a mutual investment, a shared commitment to the honest exchange of genuine support in both directions, which means that the relationship is not diminished by your honest need. It is, in fact, fulfilled by it. The friend who is never allowed to support you is a friend who is being denied one of the most significant dimensions of what genuine friendship is for. And the partner who is always steady and never supported is a partner who is being kept at the distance that the performance of strength creates, close enough to be depended on, too far to genuinely connect. Letting people carry something with you is not a burden. It is an invitation into the kind of genuine intimacy that performed strength has been preventing. It is the acknowledgement that the relationship is real enough and strong enough to hold the weight of your actual experience, which is, for the person whose image of themselves has always been the capable or the selfless or the has-it-together one, a more significant acknowledgement than it might initially appear, because it requires trusting the relationship with the truth of who you are. And trusting something with the truth of who you are is the most genuine form of investment available in any human connection. What are you actually protecting by staying strong? Look at the answer honestly, not the surface answer, not the concern for others or the professional calculation or the social risk assessment that are real but secondary. The deep answer, the image, the belief about what makes you worth keeping, the fear that without the performance, the person revealed would not merit the love and the belonging that the performance has been earning. Examine that fear, not to dismiss it. It developed for real reasons, and it deserves honest acknowledgement, but to question whether it is accurate, whether the people in your life are actually there for the performance or for the person, whether the relationships you most value are genuinely conditional on your continued composure, or whether they are, in fact, capable of something more durable and more genuine than the performance has ever allowed them to demonstrate. Because the thing you are protecting, examined honestly, is not what you think it is. You are not protecting your relationships. You are protecting yourself from finding out what your relationships are actually capable of. And the only way to find out is to stop performing and see what stays. What stays is almost always more than the fear predicted. And what becomes possible when it stays is the kind of genuine connection that the performance of strength, for all its apparent security, has never been able to produce. To Chapter 4, the difference between endurance and healing. There is a quality that is frequently mistaken for strength because it resembles strength in its external appearance. It is visible in the person who continues functioning through circumstances that would stop most people, who absorbs difficulty without visible collapse, who keeps showing up, keeps delivering, keeps moving forward with a consistency that the people around them often describe with genuine admiration. He just keeps going. She never stops. I don't know how they do it. It is the quality of endurance, and it is genuinely impressive, genuinely demanding, and genuinely not the same thing as healing. The confusion between endurance and healing is one of the most costly misunderstandings in the psychology of human resilience, because it allows a person to believe they are recovering when they are, in fact, simply surviving. It allows the continued forward motion of a life to be interpreted as evidence that whatever happened has been adequately processed, when what the forward motion is actually evidence of is the remarkable human capacity to keep functioning in the presence of unprocessed pain. These are not the same thing, and treating them as the same thing, building an identity around the capacity to endure while leaving the actual work of healing untouched, produces a very specific kind of person, someone who is impressive from the outside and quietly deteriorating from the inside. Someone who has confused the absence of breakdown with the presence of genuine recovery, and who will eventually discover, usually at a cost higher than the original difficulty, that endurance deferred is not healing achieved. To understand the distinction clearly, it helps to examine what endurance actually is and what function it serves. Endurance is the capacity to continue in the presence of difficulty, to maintain function, to keep moving, to not allow the weight of what is happening to stop the life that is required to continue regardless. This is a genuine and genuinely necessary capacity. There are circumstances in which the immediate priority is survival, in which the full emotional processing of what is happening must be deferred because the moment does not have the safety or the space that genuine processing requires. The person in the acute phase of a crisis, the parent managing their own grief while also managing their children's, the professional navigating a significant loss while also meeting the obligations that cannot be set aside. These people are not wrong to endure. They are being appropriately responsive to the reality that life does not pause for healing, and that sometimes the most honest thing available is to keep moving while acknowledging that the moving is not the same as the healing. The problem is not endurance in the acute phase. The problem is endurance that becomes permanent, that transitions from a temporary survival strategy into a way of life. The problem is the person who endures through the acute phase, and then, when the acute phase has passed and the space for genuine processing has become available, continues to endure rather than heal, continues to move forward without looking back, continues to function and deliver and present the composed face to the world, while the unprocessed material of every difficult thing they have moved through without fully processing accumulates in the interior, shaping behavior and perception and the quality of daily experience in ways that the forward motion is not addressing and cannot address. A woman named Simone had endured through more in her first 40 years than most people experience in a lifetime. A difficult childhood, a marriage that ended in a way that cost her more than she had known she could lose, a professional setback that arrived at the worst possible time and required years to recover from practically. She had moved through all of it with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned from the very beginning that stopping was not an option. She had kept going. She had rebuilt. She had demonstrated, repeatedly and genuinely, the capacity to absorb difficulty and continue functioning. And she had arrived at 40 with a life that looked, from the outside, like the evidence of remarkable resilience. What she had not done through any of it was grieve. Not really. Not in the full, honest, unmanaged way that genuine processing requires. She had cried occasionally in private, in the brief spaces between the functional demands of a life that always had something requiring her attention. She had talked about the difficult things in the way that capable people talk about difficult things, analytically from a slight distance, with the particular fluency of someone who has organized their experience into a coherent narrative that explains what happened without fully feeling it. She had moved forward with impressive consistency, and she had arrived at a place in her life that was genuinely better than what had preceded it, and that felt, she would have said, if asked, mostly fine, mostly fine, not deeply well, not genuinely at peace with the accumulated history of everything she had endured. Mostly fine, which was the specific quality of living available to someone who had endured through everything and healed through almost nothing, and who had confused the two sufficiently that the distinction had stopped being visible. The thing that finally broke through Simone's endurance was not a new crisis. It was a moment of unexpected joy. She was at a friend's wedding, a genuinely happy occasion, the wedding of two people she cared about deeply. And in the middle of a moment of celebration, she felt, rising through her with a force that surprised her completely, a grief so large and so sudden that it required everything she had to remain composed through it. Not grief about the wedding, grief that had been waiting in the accumulated interior of decades of endurance without processing, for a moment of sufficient safety to finally surface. And the moment of safety that had finally given it permission was a moment of joy, a moment in which, for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember, she was not in survival mode, was not enduring anything, was simply present in a moment of genuine happiness that her system apparently experienced as safe enough for the long-deferred reckoning to begin. She sat with it in the car afterward, alone, for 2 hours. She did not know in the beginning what she was crying about. There was no single identifiable loss presenting itself for processing. What was surfacing was not specific, but cumulative. the accumulated weight of everything she had moved through without stopping to feel it fully. Every grief managed rather than felt. Every difficulty absorbed rather than processed. Every loss endured rather than mourned. It was all there, exactly as she had left it, waiting in the interior with the patient faithfulness of unfinished business that knows it will eventually be attended to because the human system, unlike the performance of strength, is not capable of permanent suppression. This is what the distinction between endurance and healing ultimately comes down to. Endurance manages the surface. It keeps the life moving, the function maintained, the appearance of recovered adequacy intact, but it does not touch what is underneath. The pain that is endured rather than processed does not disappear. It does not diminish through neglect or resolve itself through the passage of time or become less relevant because the life has moved on to new circumstances. It waits. In the body, in the nervous system, in the habitual emotional responses that seem disproportionate to their immediate triggers because they are drawing on a reservoir of unprocessed material that the immediate trigger has merely disturbed the surface of. Healing is different from endurance in the most fundamental way available. It actually addresses what needs to be addressed. It requires the turning of genuine attention toward the difficult material rather than the continued movement away from it. It requires feeling what endurance has been preventing from being felt, not all at once, not in an uncontrolled flood that overwhelms the system, but with the deliberate paced, genuinely supported engagement with the emotional reality of what has happened that allows the nervous system to process it rather than perpetually manage it. This is harder than endurance. This is genuinely harder. Endurance is demanding in the way that carrying a heavy load is demanding. It requires sustained effort and genuine toughness, and the willingness to keep going when stopping would be easier. But it does not require you to feel the weight of what you are carrying. It only requires you to carry it. Healing requires something more confronting. It requires you to set the load down and look at it honestly, to feel its actual weight rather than the abstract, manageable version of it that endurance has converted it into. To acknowledge, specifically and honestly, what each component of the accumulated load actually is, and what it has actually cost you, and what it would mean to genuinely set it down rather than simply shifting it to a more comfortable carrying position. The pathway from endurance to healing does not require a single dramatic act of emotional exposure. It does not require the public declaration of every difficulty that has been privately managed or the wholesale dismantling of the functional life that endurance has built. What it requires is a direction change, a deliberate, consistent turning of genuine attention toward the interior rather than the perpetual movement away from it. And it requires almost always the specific resource that endurance has been substituting for, the presence of another person, whether a friend or a therapist or a partner, or any human being capable of genuine, patient, non-judgmental attention, who can hold the space for the honest engagement with what has been accumulated that is considerably more difficult to do entirely alone. There is something important to understand about why the presence of another person matters so specifically in the transition from endurance to healing. It is not only practical, though the practical support of someone who can help you navigate the material that surfaces is genuine and significant. It is relational in the deepest sense of the word. Healing from difficulty that happened in the context of relationships, and most of the significant difficulties of a human life do happen in this context, requires relational experience as part of the healing process. The person who was hurt in the context of relationship and who attempts to heal entirely outside of it is attempting to complete a process that requires an ingredient they have chosen not to include. The genuine experience of being honestly vulnerable with another person and receiving genuine, present, non-withdrawing attention in response, this experience is not supplementary to healing. For many people in many kinds of difficulty, It is constitutive of it. It is part of what the healing actually is. This is why the performed strength that prevents genuine vulnerability is not only a barrier to connection, it is a barrier to healing. Every time you endure rather than process, manage rather than feel, perform composure rather than honestly acknowledge difficulty, you are not only protecting the image that the previous chapter examined, you are deferring a healing that the system requires and that cannot be indefinitely deferred without cost. The body that has been enduring rather than healing eventually expresses what the mind has been suppressing. The relationships that have been navigated at the surface level of performed strength eventually develop the hollowness that the absence of genuine intimacy produces. The life that has been kept moving through endurance eventually reaches the point, as Simone reached it in a car park outside a wedding venue, where the accumulated weight of the unprocessed past demands the attention that the forward motion has been denying it. You do not have to wait for that moment. You do not have to endure until endurance becomes unsustainable before you allow the turning that healing requires. The turning is available now, not as a dramatic act, not as the dismantling of everything that endurance has built, but as a quiet, deliberate, genuinely courageous decision to stop moving away from what needs to be felt and to begin with whatever support is available to you. The actual work of engaging with it. Endurance got you here. It was necessary and it was real and it deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. Kurinam, but it was never meant to be the destination. It was always supposed to be the bridge, the temporary capacity that keeps you functional while you find your way to the conditions in which genuine healing becomes possible. You have been on the bridge long enough. The other side is not weakness. It is not collapse. It is not the loss of the strength that endurance built. It is the genuine, durable, honestly earned well-being of a person who has stopped moving away from their own interior and has begun, with patience and with courage and with the support that genuine healing requires, to actually engage with it. That engagement is what this chapter is asking of you. Not today in its entirety, not all at once, but as a direction, as a commitment to the honest acknowledgement that what you have been doing is enduring, and that enduring, however impressive, however necessary it has been, is not the same as healing, and that healing, however uncomfortable it is to begin, is what genuine strength actually requires. Stop enduring alone. Start healing honestly. The difference between the two is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of yourself in the process of moving through it. Chapter 5, The People Who Need You to Be Human. There is something that the people who love you have never told you directly, partly because they do not always have the language for it, and partly because the dynamic between you has never quite created the space for it to be said. It is this: your strength as you have been performing it has been keeping them at a distance they did not choose and do not want. In the composure that you believe is protecting them is, in fact, preventing them from reaching you. In the version of you that shows up in the relationship, capable, steady, never apparently in need of anything, has made them feel, in ways they have struggled to name, that the intimacy they hope for with you is always slightly out of reach, that there is a room in you they have never been invited into, that the person they love most is also, in some fundamental way, the person they know least. This is one of the most significant and least discussed costs of prolonged performed strength. Not what it does to you, though that is real and has been examined in the chapters preceding this one, but what it does to the people who love you. What it asks of them without their consent. What it denies them without their knowledge. What it quietly communicates to them through years of your reliable composure about whether they are trusted with the full truth of who you are. The people in your life who matter most do not need you to be strong in the way you have been performing strength. They need you to be human. And human means available, not just functionally available, not just present in the practical sense of showing up and delivering and maintaining your side of the relationship with the competent consistency that Perform Strength provides. Available in the full, honest, sometimes uncomfortable sense of a person who can be reached, who can be affected, who can be genuinely moved by the things that are genuinely moving and genuinely struggling with the things that are genuinely difficult. And who brings this honest version of themselves into the relationship rather than managing it out before the relationship can see it. Consider what it is like to love someone who performs strength the way this audiobook has been describing. You sense, without being able to point to anything specific, that there is more happening in them than they are showing you. You have the recurring experience of asking how they are and receiving an answer that is technically accurate and emotionally insufficient. Fine, busy, managing, the words of a person who has answered the question without letting you near the actual answer. You have learned through the accumulated experience of years that there are certain places in the relationship where you simply do not go, not because you have been explicitly refused, but because something in the way the person responds when you get close to those places communicates without words that they are not available for honest exploration. You adjust. You love them in the space they have made available, which is considerable and genuine and real in many important dimensions. But you carry alongside the love a specific and persistent sadness that you rarely speak aloud because speaking it aloud feels like criticism, and you do not want to criticize someone who is giving you everything they know how to give. The sadness is simply this: you wish they would let you in. You wish they trusted you with the parts they are managing in private. You wish that the relationship, which is already genuinely good in the ways that Perform Strength permits, could be what you sense it is capable of being if the performance were set down. This is the experience of loving someone who performs strength. It is an experience that the person performing is usually entirely unaware of producing, because the performance is organized around protection, protecting others from burden, protecting the relationship from the discomfort of genuine vulnerability. And the idea that the protection is itself producing a cost to the people it is intended to protect is a paradox that the logic of Perform Strength cannot easily accommodate. A man named Samuel had been in a marriage for 11 years that was, by any honest assessment, a good marriage. His wife, a woman named Rachel, loved him genuinely and consistently, and had given 11 years of genuine investment to building a life with him that was real and warm and functional in the best sense. But Rachel had told Samuel in a conversation that had required considerable courage to begin that she felt lonely in their marriage in a way she found difficult to explain, because it was not the loneliness of being unloved or neglected in any practical sense. It was the specific loneliness of loving someone who was not fully present, who was there in every functional way and absent in the one way that mattered most to her. She said that she felt like she was in a relationship with the performance of Samuel rather than with Samuel himself, that the person she had fallen in love with had glimpses of a depth and a vulnerability and a genuine humanness that the person she had been married to for 11 years had become increasingly reluctant to show her. Samuel heard this, and his first response was the response of a person whose identity has been built around the performance of strength for so long that the criticism of that performance felt like a criticism of everything. He said that he was the same person he had always been, that he showed up, provided, was faithful, was present, that he did not understand what more she was asking for. Rachel said something in response that Samuel returned to many times in the years that followed, because it contained a precision that eventually broke through the defense in a way that nothing before it had managed. She said that she was not asking for more, she was asking for different, that she did not need more of what he had been giving. She needed the thing he had been withholding, not from cruelty, she understood that, but from a fear she had watched operate in him for 11 years without either of them fully naming it. She needed him to need her sometimes, to be uncertain sometimes, to bring her the things he was struggling with instead of bringing her the solved versions of them after the struggle was over. She needed to be someone he turned toward when things were difficult, rather than the person he turned toward only once the difficulty had been managed into something presentable. She needed, in the simplest possible terms, for him to be human with her, and the version of strength he had been performing had been making that impossible. And this conversation was the beginning of a genuine change in Samuel and in his marriage. Not an easy change, not a quick one, but a real one. It began with the recognition that the strength he had been performing was not serving Rachel, was not serving the marriage, was not ultimately serving him, was serving only the image that he had built around the belief that his value in the relationship was contingent on his continued ability to be the capable, steady, never apparently in need of anything person that the image required him to be. The change looked like small things at first. The admission that he was worried about something instead of the presentation of a plan for addressing it. The acknowledgement that he did not know how to handle a situation instead of the competent delivery of a solution he had worked out in private. Also, the honest statement that he was having a hard week instead of the managed performance of fine. These were not dramatic revelations. They were tiny adjustments in the direction of honesty that each required. From Samuel, a courage he had not anticipated needing for such small things, and that revealed, through the requiring of it, how complete the performance had become. What Rachel did with each of these small adjustments was something that gradually, over months, dismantled the fear that had been driving the performance. She received them, not with the discomfort or the withdrawal or the diminishment of regard that the performance of strength had always been organized around preventing, where with the particular warmth of someone who has been waiting a long time for a door to open and who receives its opening not as evidence of weakness in the person who opened it, but as the most genuine gift that person has ever offered them. This is what the people who need you to be human actually do with your humanity when you offer it. Not all of them, not always, not in every relationship. There are relationships that genuinely cannot hold the weight of honest vulnerability, and the examination of those relationships is its own important work. But the people who genuinely love you, who are there for you rather than for the performance you provide, these people receive your humanity with a quality of warmth and a depth of genuine connection that the performance has never produced and cannot produce. Because genuine connection requires genuine exposure, and genuine exposure is precisely what the performance of strength has been preventing. There is another dimension of this that extends beyond the intimate relationships of a personal life and into the broader human influence that your willingness to be human could produce. The people who witness your performed strength and are privately struggling with their own difficulty receive a specific and damaging message from your composure. The message that their own struggle is evidence of inadequacy, that the right response to difficulty is the management you appear to be demonstrating, that the genuine human experience of being sometimes not fine is something to be hidden rather than acknowledged. And because the evidence available to them, your visible steadiness, suggests that the capable people around them are handling their lives without the kind of difficulty that they themselves are experiencing. When you stop performing and allow your genuine humanity to be visible, when you acknowledge difficulty, express genuine need, demonstrate that strength and struggle are not opposites, but companions in any honest human life, you give permission to everyone around you to be honest about their own experience. You become, through the simple act of being genuinely human, a model of something that the performed strength you have been demonstrating could never model. The possibility that difficulty is not inadequacy, that need is not weakness, that the honest expression of genuine human experience is not something to be managed out of visibility, but something to be met with the genuine attention and genuine care that every struggling human being deserves. Your children, if you have them, are learning from you right now what strength looks like and what the appropriate response to difficulty is. They are learning it not from what you tell them, but from what they watch you do, from the model your daily behavior provides of how a person navigates the inevitable challenges of a human life. The child who watches their parent perform strength without ever seeing them genuinely struggle learns that struggling is shameful, that the right way to handle difficulty is in private, with competence and composure, without burdening others or allowing the difficulty to become visible. They internalize this model with the thoroughness of children absorbing everything that the adults they depend on demonstrate, and they carry it forward into their own lives where it produces the same performance of strength and the same interior isolation that this audiobook has been examining. The child who watches their parent be genuinely human, who sees their parent acknowledge difficulty honestly, ask for help when help is needed, process struggle with the support of genuine relationships rather than in the isolation of performed composure, learns something entirely different. They learn that difficulty is a normal feature of a human life and not evidence of failure. That genuine strength includes the courage to be honest about hardship. That the people who love you can be trusted with the truth of your experience. One, that relationships are for exactly this, for the mutual, honest, genuinely supported navigation of everything that being human involves, including and especially the parts that are hard. This is what is at stake in your decision to stop performing strength. Not only your own healing, though, that is real and it matters enormously. The model you are providing, the permission you are either giving or withholding from the people around you to be honestly human in their own struggles. The depth of connection you are either making possible or preventing in the relationships that most deserve your genuine self. The quality of the love you are either offering or withholding from the people who need you not to be strong in the way you have been performing it, but to be present, honest, genuinely available, and fully beautifully or courageously human. They need that from you. They have always needed it. And the version of you that has been performing strength in their presence has been giving them everything except the one thing they need most. Give it to them. It will not diminish you. It will be the most genuinely strong thing you have ever done. Chapter 6. Learning to Receive. There is a specific discomfort that people who have spent years performing strength experience when someone tries to care for them. It is not the discomfort of genuine aversion. They do not, in most cases, actually not want the care. It is the discomfort of unfamiliarity, of occupying a position in a relationship that the entire architecture of their identity has been organized around never occupying. The position of the person being helped rather than the person helping. The person being held rather than the person holding. The person whose need is visible and being attended to rather than the person whose competent, composed availability makes them the natural default for attending to everyone else's. This discomfort is so consistent and so specifically characteristic of people who perform strength that it deserves its own examination. Because the inability to receive is not a minor feature of the performed strength pattern. It is one of its most significant and most practically limiting dimensions. A person can intellectually understand everything the previous chapters have been describing. They can acknowledge the lie, identify what the performance has been protecting, recognize the difference between endurance and healing, when genuinely understand what the people around them need from their humanity, and then someone offers them genuine care, and the entire intellectual framework collapses into the single, immediate, visceral response of I am fine, I don't need anything, thank you, but I am handling it, and the cycle continues. The inability to receive is the practical barrier that stands between the understood insight and the lived change. And understanding why it is so difficult, understanding the specific psychological architecture that makes receiving so much harder than giving for the person who has built their identity around the latter is the necessary step toward genuinely developing the capacity for it. The first reason receiving is difficult for people who perform strength is the one that connects most directly to what was examined in Chapter 2, the identity threat that genuine need represents. When your sense of worth and your sense of belonging are organized around being the capable one, the available one, the person who gives rather than receives, then accepting help is not just an isolated act of gratitude. It is a disruption of the fundamental structure of how you understand yourself and your place in the relationships that matter to you. It activates the fear that the image, the one the previous chapter identified as the primary thing being protected, is being compromised. That the person who helps you is now seeing a version of you that falls outside the definition of who you have always been in that relationship. And that what they see might alter how they regard you in ways that the performance of strength was specifically designed to prevent. This is why so many people who perform strength receive help with a specific and recognizable quality of discomfort that goes beyond mere awkwardness. They receive it with a kind of urgency to restore the previous balance, to quickly establish that the moment of need was temporary, that they are already recovering, that the competent and available version of themselves will be back momentarily, and the person providing the care need not adjust their understanding of who they are dealing with. They receive help while simultaneously managing the impression that the need for help creates, which means they are not really receiving at all. And now they are performing the reception of help while privately maintaining the performance of strength. Two performances running simultaneously, both in the service of the same underlying protection. The second reason receiving is so difficult is more practical and more directly tied to the history of specific experiences with vulnerability. Many people who have developed the pattern of performed strength did so in direct response to experiences of trying to receive and finding that the receiving was not safe, that the expression of genuine need was met with responses that were inadequate, dismissive, exploitative, or withdrawn in ways that reinforce the original belief that managing privately was safer than offering honestly. These experiences are real, and their lessons were rational in the context that produced them. The child whose genuine distress was minimized or ignored learns, with the entirely appropriate intelligence of someone adapting to their environment, that expressing distress does not produce the care that distress requires. The person whose vulnerability was used against them in a relationship learns, with equally appropriate self-protection, that the honest exposure of genuine need creates a risk that the benefit of the potential care does not justify. These learned responses to the experience of unsafe receiving do not automatically update when the circumstances change, when the relationship being navigated is genuinely safe, when the person offering care is genuinely capable of providing it, when the context is fundamentally different from the one in which the original lesson was learned. The nervous system does not distinguish context with the nuance that the intellectual understanding can. It responds to the signal of vulnerability, of genuine need being exposed to another person, with the same protective response that the original unsafe context installed, regardless of whether the current context warrants it. This is why the development of the capacity to receive is not primarily an intellectual project. It is not accomplished through the understanding that receiving is acceptable or the acknowledgement that the people currently offering care are genuinely safe to receive from. It is accomplished through the gradual, patient, gently repeated experience of actually receiving, of allowing care to be offered and remaining present through the discomfort of receiving it, rather than deflecting it back into the more comfortable position of giving until the nervous system accumulates enough direct evidence of safe receiving to begin updating the response that the original unsafe experience is installed. A woman named Diane had been in therapy for several months before her therapist made an observation that she found both accurate and genuinely uncomfortable. The therapist noted that Diane had a consistent pattern in their sessions of intellectualizing her own difficulty, of analyzing her experience with the fluency and the distance of someone who was thinking about their pain rather than feeling it, and of responding to the therapist's expressions of genuine care with a kind of gracious deflection that kept the care at the same slight distance that characterized her relationship with everyone who tried to get genuinely close to her. The therapist said, gently and directly, that Diane was very good at talking about her experience and very reluctant to have her experience, to be actually in it, actually feeling it, in the presence of someone who was trying to be with her in it rather than simply helping her analyze it from the outside. Diane sat with this for a long time. Then she said something that she had not planned to say and that surprised her with its honesty. She said that letting someone be with her in her pain felt more frightening than the pain itself. That the pain she had learned over years to manage, to contain, to analyze, to convert into something cognitively workable that she could navigate with competence. But someone else being genuinely present in the pain with her, witnessing it without analyzing it, caring for her inside it rather than helping her process out of it, that felt like an exposure of a kind she had never fully experienced and did not know how to survive. The therapist asked her what she thought would happen if she allowed it. Diane said she did not know, and the therapist said that the not knowing was precisely the point, that the fear was organized around a predicted outcome that had never actually been tested in a genuinely safe context, and that the only way to discover what actually happened was to allow the experience rather than continuing to prevent it. What Diane discovered, over the months of gradually and incrementally allowing the experience of being genuinely cared for in her difficulty, was not what the fear had predicted. The exposure did not produce the withdrawal of regard she had been organized against. The visibility of her genuine pain did not diminish the therapist's care. It deepened it, in the way that genuine vulnerability always deepens genuine care, because care requires something real to be directed toward, and the performed competence that genuine care usually encounters in people who perform strength gives it nowhere to go. The genuine Diane, the struggling, uncertain, not always fine Diane, gave the care somewhere to go. And the experience of having it received by someone who did not withdraw in its presence began, slowly and genuinely, to update the deeply embedded belief that receiving was not safe. This is the process. It is not quick and it is not linear, and it requires, almost always, relationships of sufficient genuine safety to practice in, which means that part of the work of developing the capacity to receive is the honest evaluation of which relationships in your life have the quality of genuine safety that this kind of practice requires. Not every relationship does. Not every person in your life is equipped or able to receive your genuine vulnerability with the patient. Non-withdrawing, genuinely caring attention that the development of your capacity to receive depends on identifying the relationships that are, and bringing the practice of honest receiving into those relationships specifically is a more realistic and more productive approach than attempting to be universally vulnerable in every relationship simultaneously. There is a practical dimension of learning to receive that is worth examining directly, because it operates in the very specific and very ordinary moments of daily life where the pattern of deflecting care expresses itself most consistently. It is the moment when someone asks how you are, and you say fine when you are not fine. The moment when someone offers to help, and you say I am handling it when you are not entirely handling it. The moment when someone expresses care, and you redirect the conversation to their well-being before the care has been genuinely received. And these moments are so small and so habitual that they rarely feel like significant choices. But they are the daily cumulative practice of the deflection that keeps genuine receiving impossible. And they are also, therefore, the daily cumulative opportunity to practice something different. The practice of something different does not require the full disclosure of your entire interior in response to a casual, "How are you?" It requires only a small, genuine, incrementally more honest response than the default deflection. Fine becomes not great today, honestly. I am handling it becomes, I could actually use some help with this. Thank you, but I am okay becomes thank you. That means something to me. These are not dramatic shifts, and they are tiny movements in the direction of genuine receiving, small enough to be manageable for a nervous system that is not yet accustomed to the experience, and significant enough to begin building the new pattern that genuine receiving requires. Each small act of genuine receiving that does not produce the feared outcome, each honest acknowledgement of need that is met with care rather than withdrawal, each moment of genuine vulnerability that produces connection rather than the diminishment of regard, adds to the evidence that the nervous system is accumulating about the actual safety of receiving. And as the evidence accumulates, the discomfort gradually diminishes. Not to zero, receiving may always require a degree of conscious intention for people who have spent years deflecting it, but to a level that is no longer the primary barrier between the insight and the lived change. Learning to receive is not a passive process, and it is not an easy one for the person who has organized their identity around giving. It requires the willingness to occupy an unfamiliar position in the relationships that matter most, to allow the dynamic to flow in the direction that feels uncomfortable rather than reflexively redirecting it to the more familiar territory of being the one who provides, to sit with the discomfort of being cared for without immediately restoring the balance by demonstrating that the care was unnecessary. It requires ultimately the trust that the relationships capable of genuine care are strong enough to hold your genuine need without being diminished by it. And the development of that trust is both the work and the reward, because the relationship that has held your genuine need and remained whole, that has received your honest vulnerability and responded with genuine care, is a relationship that has demonstrated something about its actual strength that the years of performed strength never could. It is a relationship that has been tested in the way that matters most. And what has been tested and held is considerably more trustworthy than what has only ever been protected. Receive the care that is being offered. Not all of it. Not from everyone. Not in every context. Discernment about who and when and how much is a legitimate and important part of this practice. But from the people who are genuinely capable of it, in the relationships that have the genuine safety to hold it, receive it. Let it in. Let it be what it is, which is one of the most genuinely human exchanges available to two people who trust each other enough to allow both the giving and the receiving to flow in both directions. That bidirectionality is what genuine relationship is, and you have been allowing it to flow in only one direction for long enough. It is time to let it come back. Chapter 7. What real strength actually looks like. Everything this audiobook has been building toward arrives here in this final chapter, not as a dramatic conclusion, but as a quiet clarification, a settling of the question that the title raised at the beginning and that every chapter since has been circling from different angles. If the strength you have been performing is not real strength, if the composure and the endurance and the self-sufficiency and the perpetual capability that you have been maintaining at such significant cost is not what genuine strength actually is, then what is it? What does real strength look like? What does it feel like from the inside? And how do you build it in place of the performance that has, until now, been substituting for it? The answer is not what the culture around you has been advertising. It is not louder or more impressive or more externally visible than what you have already been doing. In many ways, it is quieter, more internal, less oriented toward the impression it creates and more oriented toward the actual quality of the life it produces. Real strength is not the absence of struggle. It is the honest, present, a fully engaged relationship with struggle that allows a person to move through difficulty without being defined or diminished by it. It is not the performance of being unaffected. It is the genuine capacity to be affected and to remain, to feel the full weight of what is genuinely heavy, and to carry it with the support of honest relationship and genuine self-knowledge, rather than with the isolated, defended, quietly depleting endurance that the performance of strength requires. To be genuinely strong is to be genuinely honest. Not honest in the performative sense of a person who has decided to be more open as a strategy for appearing more authentic. Honest in the deep, my structural sense of a person whose interior and exterior are sufficiently aligned that the energy consumed by maintaining the gap between them, the energy that the performance of strength has been consuming for years, is freed for the actual work of living. The genuinely strong person does not spend significant internal resources managing the impression of their emotional state. They spend those resources on the actual engagement with their experience, with the difficulty, the uncertainty, the genuine human complexity of a life that is being honestly lived rather than carefully managed from a slight remove. Consider what this actually looks like in a person rather than in the abstract. It looks like someone who can say, I do not know in the moments that genuinely call for it, without the anxiety of a person whose sense of worth depends on always having the answer. It looks like someone who can ask for help without the internal negotiation that performed strength requires. The justification, the minimization, the careful framing designed to make the need seem smaller and more manageable than it is, so that the asking feels less like an exposure. It looks like someone who can be moved, genuinely, visibly, honestly moved by the things that are genuinely moving, without the subsequent management of the impression that the movement created. It looks like someone who fails and says so honestly, who struggles and acknowledges it directly, who does not know and admits it cleanly, who needs and expresses it without the performance of not needing that the previous chapters have been examining in such careful detail. In none of these behaviors are weakness in any meaningful sense of the word. They are the behaviors of a person who has developed the genuine interior stability that makes honesty safe, who does not need the performance of strength because the actual strength that has been built through years of genuine self-development, honest self-knowledge, and the patient cultivation of genuine relationships is sufficient to carry the weight of honest exposure without collapsing. This is the crucial distinction. The performance of strength is organized around the belief that the genuine self, honestly exposed, is not adequate to hold the weight of vulnerability. That the actual person, without the armor of the image, is too fragile or too insufficient or too much of a burden to survive the honest encounter with genuine relationship. And the real strength that this audiobook has been pointing toward is built on the opposite belief. The belief that has been earned rather than simply assumed, demonstrated through the gradual accumulation of honest self-knowledge and genuine relational experience, rather than through the maintenance of an image. The belief that the genuine self is sufficient, that it can be honest about its difficulty without being destroyed by the honesty, that it can receive care without being diminished by the receiving, that it can be fully human, struggling and uncertain and sometimes genuinely not fine, and remain whole. Building this real strength is not a project with a clear beginning and a definitive end. It is a direction, a sustained orientation toward honesty, toward genuine relationship, and toward the ongoing development of the interior conditions that make performed strength unnecessary. And like all genuine directions, it is built not in the grand moments of declaration, but in the accumulated small choices of ordinary days. The choice to acknowledge what you are actually feeling rather than managing it past. The choice to bring your genuine difficulty to a relationship that can hold it rather than processing it entirely in private. The choice to receive care without deflecting it back to the more comfortable position of giving. the choice to be in the ordinary moments of a life that is actually being lived, the genuine person rather than the performance. Eddie, a man named Marcus, had spent most of his adult life in the pattern this audiobook has described, performing strength with the completeness of someone for whom the performance had long since become identity. His journey out of it was not dramatic and it was not quick. It began with a single, honest conversation with his brother, who had known him longer than anyone and who had watched the performance for decades with the patient sadness of someone who loved the person inside it and had never quite been granted access to them. Marcus told his brother, in words that required more courage than anything he had done professionally, that he was not doing well, that he had not been doing well for longer than he could precisely identify, that he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the sustained effort of maintaining a performance that he no longer had the resources to sustain. His brother did not offer solutions, did not minimize or redirect or move quickly to the practical dimensions of the problem. He said that he had been waiting for this conversation for 20 years, that he had loved Marcus his entire life and had always felt that the Marcus he was being given, the capable, composed, never apparently in need of anything Marcus, was the edited version of a person he had always sensed was considerably more than the editing allowed. He said that he was glad the editing had finally stopped, and that whatever was on the other side of it, he was there for that version too. Marcus described the hours following that conversation as containing a quality of relief so complete that it felt physical, a literal lightening of the body that he had not anticipated and that he found in its intensity deeply clarifying about how much the performance had been costing him, not just emotionally, physically, the chronic low-grade muscular tension of a person who has been holding themselves together against a weight they were not allowing themselves to acknowledge. He had not known how heavy it was until it was, for the first time in more years than he could count, partially set down. The change that followed was not linear. There were days when the old performance reasserted itself with the force of a pattern built over decades. When the instinct to manage and compose and present the fine version was stronger than the new direction he was trying to move in. There were relationships in which the honest version of himself was not received as his brother had received it, in which the vulnerability was met with discomfort or the attempt to help was clumsy in ways that activated the old fear that receiving was not safe. He navigated these setbacks not as evidence that the direction was wrong, but as the expected terrain of a change that was real and therefore required genuine effort, rather than simply the enthusiasm of a good intention. What built over months and then years was something that Marcus described as qualitatively different from anything he had previously understood strength to be. Not stronger in the conventional sense, not more capable, not more resistant to difficulty, not more impressive in the ways that his performed strength had been impressive, but more genuine, more present, more actually available to the life he was living and the people he was living it with, more in contact with his own experience, with the full range of it, the joy as well as the pain, the ease as well as the difficulty, in a way that the performance had never permitted because the performance had required the management of the interior rather than the genuine habitation of it. He said, in the way that people describe things they have earned rather than things they have been given, that he felt for the first time like he was actually living his life rather than managing it. That the difference between the two was larger than he had anticipated and more significant in its daily quality than any of the external achievements he had previously organized his sense of success around. That the person he was becoming, imperfect, honest, sometimes struggling, genuinely present, was someone he was more at home with than the polished, composed performance version he had spent decades constructing and maintaining. This is what real strength actually looks like. From the outside, it is less impressive than the performance. It does not produce the same quality of admiration or the same reliable reputation for capability that the performance provided. The genuinely strong person is not always fine, is not always composed, is not always the one being leaned on rather than the one leaning. They are instead with something more valuable and more rare than the performer of strength. They are genuine, present, honest, rooted in the actual quality of their own interior rather than in the maintenance of an image. And the people around them, rather than admiring them from the distance that performance creates, are able to actually reach them, to genuinely know them, to be in real relationship with them rather than with the carefully managed version of them that the performance made available. That genuine relationship, the quality of human connection that becomes possible when the performance is set down, is both the fruit of real strength and the evidence of it. Because the person who can be genuinely known and who remains genuinely present through the knowing is demonstrating something that the performer of strength never could. Not that they are without difficulty, but that the difficulty does not require hiding, that the genuine self, honest, human, sometimes struggling, always present, is adequate, is enough, is in fact more than enough for the relationships in the life that genuine strength makes possible. You have been performing strength for long enough. The performance served you once and it cost you consistently, and it has brought you to this moment, which is the moment of being ready for something more genuine, not easier, more genuine, not the absence of difficulty, the honest, present, fully supported engagement with it that transforms difficulty from something to be endured alone into something to be moved through in the genuine company of the people who love the real you rather than the performed version. Stop pretending to be strong. Not because strength is wrong, because the strength you have been performing is not the strength you are capable of. The real version is deeper, more honest, more genuinely durable, and more available to the full quality of a human life than the performance has ever permitted. It is built not through the continued suppression of your genuine experience, but through the patient, honest, courageously vulnerable engagement with it, through the relationships that can hold your genuine self, through the gradual development of the interior conditions that make honesty safe and receiving possible and genuine human connection, the daily reality of a life that is being actually lived. That life is available to you, not someday. It beginning in the next honest moment you choose to offer someone the genuine version of how you are, rather than the managed one. Beginning in the next act of genuine receiving, rather than gracious deflection. Beginning in the next small, quiet, entirely unglamorous choice to be actually present in your own difficulty, rather than performing composure over the top of it. Begin there. The strength that follows will be something worth having. Not because it looks impressive, because it is real. If this audiobook has reached something in you, if it has named a pattern you recognized, offered language for something you have been living without the words for, or shifted something in the way you understand what genuine strength requires, please share that. Would tell the person in your life who has been performing strength for too long and who needs to hear that there is something more genuine and more sustainable on the other side of the performance. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it now. Because this kind of honest, deep, genuinely human content is what this space is built for. And there is more of it coming for the people who are ready for it. Thank you for listening. Now stop pretending and begin.